Hello there. Welcome to the temporary set while the studio gets built out. I can still slide pretty well too, and I also got some new socks for Christmas, so those are helping quite a bit. Unfortunately now, if I overestimate my slide, I just kind of slam into the counter instead of just going off the edge of the island. Anyways, if the internet serves me right, about a month ago, a whole lot of you acquired new espresso machines. Now, a month ago was holidays and/or Christmas, which is really where new equipment comes into play for a lot of coffee enthusiasts. Now, espresso machines are entirely different beasts than your kind of standard brewing equipment. So today, I thought we would do an overview of kind of everything you should know, at least when you're starting out, about your espresso machine. You've had a month to play around with it. Maybe you found some things you like, maybe you haven't. So hopefully we're gonna clear up some of those variables in order to make the espresso machine work well for you and also make it work well for a long time. We're gonna be organized today. I have a list. It is a bulleted list. We have multiple topics, so let's just dive into this. Now, the first section today, I'm calling bar basics. These are gonna be things that you should probably acquire pretty quickly in order to make both your workflow with your espresso machine as efficient as possible, but also to make your espresso taste really good. These are some important things that you will carry with you throughout your coffee journey, and multiple of them have different uses with different sorts of brewing. So you might use some of these for your pour overs or your drip coffee. It doesn't have to just be for your espresso. Anyways, starting off at the top, if you have an espresso machine, you should probably have a scale as well. I'm not super picky on what sort of scale you should have. I'm more excited about the fact that you have any scale at all, frankly. Scales are really important when getting kind of deeper into coffee. When brewing coffee, the primary thing we want to make sure is possible is that your brewing experience is replicable, meaning that if you have something that you really like one day, you're able to do the exact same thing the next day to recreate that delicious experience. A lot of coffee gear and a lot of recipes online will often measure coffee in terms of teaspoons and tablespoons and measurements that are kind of hard to replicate. By having a scale and measuring things by weight, your recipes become a lot more replicable. And kitchen scales are just really nice to have for a whole bunch of reasons, including if you're a cook or chef of any type. So we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into the bare basics of espresso, but having a kitchen scale or an espresso scale, very important. The next thing you need to have in your espresso making is a tamp of some sort. Now, this is just a random tamp that I have. I have very many of these. And most espresso machines, when you buy them, will come with a standardized tamp for that machine. Usually these are made of plastic. You have seen a billion of them on this channel, and I'm not a huge fan of them. Tamps should be really nicely weighted at the bottom. This is a very heavy tool. If you whack someone with it, you are likely to give them a concussion. That's how hefty this is. Tamps are very important though, because they create essentially the surface and the compactness of your puck of espresso, which are very important qualities for good espresso. You want that surface to be evenly tamped down. You want it to be all evenly compacted all the way through the puck. You also want a very level surface to it. You don't want your puck to look like this at a 45-degree angle. You want it to be nice and steady. And having a good tamp is very important for that. Now, the only thing you really have to note is what size your portafilter is. Not all tamps fit all portafilters. The kind of standardized, for the most part, size most portafilters you'll find in higher end machines and then also in cafes are 58 millimeters. So that's what this is right here. But if you're getting a smaller machine, let's say a Breville or something else, they may have a more proprietary sized basket. And so you'll just have to look into what size your portafilter and basket are and then match your tamp to that. The next thing I recommend you have, if you are on your espresso journey, is a tamping mat of some sort. Now, this ties in very closely to the tamp itself. Now, a tamping mat is pretty explanatory. This is, however, one of the items that I think if you don't want it immediately, you don't really have to get it. This is a little bit superfluous, but it is nice to have overall, and I'll show you why. So, tamping mat sits right like that on your kitchen counter, and you will generally have it in front of your espresso machine. Now, your tamp can sit nicely there. It can live there. That's its home now. Now, you'll notice that it has these kind of placeholders here, these sort of ridges. These are perfectly made to fit your portafilter. Let me go grab mine. I have a portafilter here. Now, I could tamp on the counter. That could work. I might cause some damage because, again, when tamping, you are pressing down, you're causing force, and you're kind of digging these spouts of your portafilter into your counter. It's fine. You could do that. Something to note though is, as I mentioned before, we want the surface of our puck to be as even as possible. So let's say your portafilter isn't made to just sit on the counter. Let's say it's not made to kind of lie flat like this. You might end up tamping at a weird angle of some sort. Now, if you have a tamping mat, you're able to place it here. You can even look to make sure you're at a nice perpendicular angle with the floor. tamp like this, and you're all done. Meaning you haven't made your portafilter touch or dig into any part of your counter. You're able to very easily and visually ensure that you're tamping flatly. Really, it's a nice extra barrier between you and some less than ideal espresso. Another thing you will like to have in your bar, a nice bar towel. I could talk about bar towels for ages. I have many opinions, including how you should fold them. But that being said, having a nice bar towel will go a long way. Now, this is what's called a microfiber towel, and it has many uses. We use these in cafes for a whole bunch of things. Primarily though, we use them for cleaning our portafilter. So once you're done knocking out your puck, you use it to catch all those loose grounds, make sure you're set up for success for your next shot. We also use microfiber towels for cleaning off the steam wand. A very, very lightly damp microfiber towel will do wonders to crusty milk that has ended up at the end of your steam wand. So having one or two of these somewhere in the vicinity of your espresso machine, very, very helpful. And also, if you asked, and you probably didn't, but here are my opinions about folding micro towels, or any towels in general, frankly. I am a huge fan of the tri-fold technique. So you have your square here, you go about halfway in with one side, you go halfway in with the other side, very nice. Then you go about a third in there, fold over, you go a third there. So you have nice couple of layers here. I think this is great. You can kind of fold it into like a taco sort of scenario here. Makes it very easy for grabbing, wiping down your steam wand, any of that. You also maximize the level of like clean surface that you have. So let's say you get this side all dirty, no problem. Swap it around, got a clean surface here. Now you get all of this dirty, no problem. Flip it inside out, refold, you have all of those new ways. You can also entirely refold it. You put that inside part, now fold it out, and you can do the entire thing again. It's really great. It's a very efficient way to use towels. I could talk about towels for a while. Let's move on to our last two items. Another thing that you will find very, very helpful in your espresso bar setup is a knock box of some sort. There are a whole variety of knock boxes. Most brands that create espresso machines have a knock box of some sort. I don't care which kind you have. This one just happens to be from Breville. But a knock box, very simple. It's a nice place to gather up your espresso pucks. You see it has this little crossbar right here. So simply enough, you're all done. Let's pretend you have an espresso puck in here. Some nice tapping or banging or whatever you have, and then you end up with your puck inside this makeshift little trash can. Now, usually people will set these up right by their espresso machine, so it makes the workflow very fast. You've pulled your espresso, you take it out, you knock it out, you put it in, you're all done again. You don't have to go climbing around to wherever else your trash can is located in the kitchen. You don't have to try to like awkwardly knock out the puck in the trash can, which, you know, you can do, but sometimes to varying degrees of success. A knockbox is a little built-in trash can for your coffee setup. The last thing I think you should have for your bar is a pitcher. Now, you don't have to have this. This is very much for people who like milk drinks, which if you have an espresso machine, you probably have a steam wand, and ideally you can maximize the use of your espresso machine by both using the steam wand for milk drinks and also just pulling espresso by itself. Investing in a nice latte art pitcher will go a very, very long way. I do have actually strong opinions about pitchers. Well-designed pitchers are drastically better than kind of like lower end pitchers, both in terms of the shape of the spout. Some spouts are easier for latte art, some are worse for latte art, and also in terms of size. One thing you want to note is that you should think about what size milk drinks you like when buying the type of pitcher. If you like smaller milk drinks like I do, you might want a smaller pitcher. This is a 15-ounce pitcher. However, they go up to 22 ounces or 32 ounces. So keep in mind what sort of milk drinks you like when buying your pitcher. Those are your bar basics. Now, let's talk about some very rough basics in cleaning your espresso machine. Now, when it comes to cleanliness of your espresso machine and its adjoining parts, this is very, very important because anything that is left over in your espresso machine or on your portafilter or what have you will end up leaving some ickiness in your final beverage that you're creating. So if you leave buildup and oil buildup and coffee buildup and all of that stuff, eventually you're gonna end up with a type of espresso or a product that is less than satisfactory. I'm not gonna go super deep into a guide about cleaning your espresso machine because most of you will have a wide array of espresso machines, and when it comes to them, you should probably follow your manufacturer's specifications on how to clean it. However, there are a couple things you can do that really just span across any make of espresso machine. You can apply this to really any portafilter, and it's something that is pretty easy to do. I have done a very bad thing in preparation for this video. I have left my espresso machine uncleaned, my portafilter uncleaned for a very, very long time. Now, I've done this specifically so you can see the type of grime that will build up after regular use of an espresso machine over the course of multiple weeks. Again, do as I say, but not as because I do. This is just for demonstration. Now, before we dig into this, let's talk about the products we're gonna use in cleaning this. I've talked about it in many videos, including one recently, but this right here is Puro, our Lord and Savior. Puro Caf or Cafiza is pretty standard cleaning material across all cafes, and it's very easy to get to have in your house as well. This stuff is absolutely fantastic at cleaning like anything. It's gentle enough for a lot of really delicate things, but at the same time, if you have like a hydro flask or like some sort of thermos that is just crusty and disgusting, this will get it clean. It's that good. Anyways, we're gonna use this as the primary cleaning agent in cleaning portafilter, and also you can use it in cleaning and back flushing your espresso machine. So to clean your espresso machine, I have got a high-walled bowl here that I can kind of fit everything into. Got myself some cleaning powder, the Puro or Cafiza or what have you. And I'm also bringing up some water to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit or approximately 98 plus or minus a little bit degrees Celsius. I usually just eyeball my Puro. I'll just knock like a little bit into the lid here. Like to see, it's a very small amount. It might not even be a teaspoon. A little bit goes a long way. I'm just gonna create a nice bath with my hot water and get all that Puro dissolved before I add any of my tools to it. Okay, we'll set this to the side, we'll let it dissolve, we'll add some more hot water after our portafilter is all nestled in there. All right, for demonstration here, I have a little scrubbing tool that happened to come with my espresso machine and my portafilter. You don't necessarily have to have this specific scrubbing tool. If you wanna use just like a gentle scrubber or like a rag or something like that, that works great as well. But anyways, you have your portafilter here and we need to pry out this basket right here. So you can just kind of like hook your fingers under this little ledge here, pops right out, or it should pop right out. Now this is very shameful. This is disgusting what I have created here, but this is the bottom of my basket right now, and this is the inside of my portafilter. This is gross, just so we're totally clear. This is not okay. Thankfully though, it's very easy to clean. First thing we're gonna wanna do is scrub off all of this, and it comes off on my fingers. So I'm just gonna go over to my sink here and under some warm running water and give this a good scrub just to start off. Now already you can see that this looks a lot better. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better. So we're now gonna take our bowl Cafiza. We're just gonna drop that right inside it. I'm gonna do the exact same thing to the portafilter itself. There is the bottom of my portafilter. Now, it is certainly not perfect, but at least you can begin to see the silver again instead of just black oil and grime. Now, we're gonna pop this in here as well. Now, I'm gonna add the rest of my hot water until it is all mostly submerged. One thing you wanna be careful of when submerging like your portafilter in Cafiza is try not to get really any of it on this handle right here. And this handle is made of like a soft rubber material, and continual exposure to Cafiza and or really hot water can cause it to deteriorate. So just be careful. Now we're gonna set this all to the side. Give it a soak for like 5-10 minutes maybe. Now, while we let that soak, I wanna talk a little bit about the coffee you're using in your espresso machine. Coffee shopping and coffee purchasing has a lot to do with personal preference. However, there are a few like guidelines you can take into consideration when shopping, whether you're going to a grocery store to get your beans or whether you're going to a local roaster. Doesn't really matter, this kind of rings true all across the board. Now, of course, as someone who's drinking coffee, you know your own preferences best. You know what sort of processing or flavor notes or like roast or anything like that that you're looking for. That's totally up to you. However, one thing that you should be looking for across the board is gonna be roast date. Now that's when the coffee was roasted, how long ago that was. Usually this is located on a tag somewhere on the side or sometimes on the bottom just because it's not the most attractive thing to have stamped on it. A lot of people have the misconception that you want the freshest coffee possible. And while that's kind of true, there is a little bit of a caveat to it. Usually, and especially with espresso, you want coffee that has had a little bit of time to off gas is what we call it. Freshly roasted coffee is still in the process of releasing gases. And if you pull espresso with coffee that was roasted, let's say yesterday, you're gonna end up with something that isn't gonna taste awesome. There's also a couple like very visual notes that you can tell if a coffee is super, super fresh. One of the most common is a really, really prominent crema. That's that kind of lighter, like caramel colored, fluffier layer that sits on top of your espresso. Fresh coffee that has been super recently roasted will have a very, very thick and prominent crema. And again, this is all a game of balance. Crema is awesome. Too much crema, sometimes not awesome. My preferred kind of like time out is getting coffee for espresso that's been sitting for like and by sitting, I mean off gassing, for anywhere between 7 to 14 days. Like a week to 2 weeks off roast is awesome and is still like a wonderful range for tasting espresso. There are all sorts of studies out there that talk about the amount of time you should let your coffee off gas. It's again, a lot up to personal preference, but just keep in mind that your coffee doesn't need to be roasted yesterday. You can have a little bit of time on it and it will still taste amazing. Now, with that being said, I'm gonna get our portafilter out of this Cafeza bath. I'm gonna get it cleaned off, and while I do so, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the coffee we're gonna be using here in the next portion of this video. I wanna give a huge thank you to Trade Coffee for sponsoring today's video. In the season of New Year's resolutions and people circling back, it's easy to forget the little or not so little things like keeping your coffee shelf stocked. With Trade, that will never happen. Trade is a coffee subscription service that makes it easy to discover new coffees and make your best cup at home every day. Trade partners with the nation's top-rated independent roasters to send you the best quality coffee you can get. And whether you know what you like or are new to specialty coffee, Trade has you covered. We've talked about a wide array of coffees from Trade, but right now I'm lucky enough to be working through 2 bags from them, a blend and a single origin. This washed Ethiopian coffee from Steady State out of Carlsbad, California has quickly become a favorite both on Kalita Wave and as espresso. And of course, the Southern Weather blend from Onyx is a mainstay on my shelf. So if you're ready to have a better year by upgrading your morning routine with better coffee, right now Trade is offering my subscribers a free bag of coffee with any subscription at drinktrade.com/MDC. That's drinktrade.com/MDC for a free bag of coffee with any subscription purchase. Welcome back. I've now given this a good rinse out of the Cafeza, and I just want to show you how icky that water got. That is not, I don't know if you can even see it. It's very, very full and very hot. This is an icky color, so we're just gonna pour that down the drain. This looks like a pretty nice and clean basket again, meaning the coffee we're gonna get out of this is gonna taste a lot better than when it was running through all that residual just muck that was caked on the bottom. Our portafilter too, looking significantly better. There is still a little bit of wear and tear that is in here. This is kind of permanent wear and tear, as it is a portafilter I've been using for like literally years. Very, very long time. There is some stuff that you sometimes just can't get out. That is okay. Anyways, these are all clean, which means we can pull some coffee through them. Now, very quickly, I want to talk about grinding coffee. This is something that is a very important component of how your espresso is going to taste and your ability to dial it in. Some espresso machines, a lot of the kind of higher end Breville espresso machines specifically, will have grinders included in the unit itself, meaning you have your like group head on one side and you have a hopper on the other side, and you just kind of like get your coffee ground and then you pop it into the group head. It's very easy. However, a lot of espresso machines don't have grinders included, and grinders can be just as expensive, if not frankly more expensive, than the espresso machine itself. It's very much like a camera body and camera lens situation, if that's a comparison that anyone can make sense of. If you are someone who doesn't have a grinder or doesn't have the budget to spend on a grinder right now, that is totally fine. Of course, freshly ground coffee, like ground the morning you're gonna use it, is always like kind of the optimal scenario. All hope is not lost if you're not ready to get into the grinder space yet. The top thing I can recommend you do is get your coffee bought and then ground freshly at a roastery. So if you go to a cafe that is selling bags of coffee that perhaps they roast or their like companion roaster roasts, you can often just very easily ask them to grind it for espresso for you in shop. It's very easy. As a barista, this is a request I get all the time. Now, there are some downsides to this. The minute you grind your coffee, you have essentially put like a ticking clock on it, and you're gonna wanna use it as soon as possible because ground coffee is not gonna last and maintain freshness nearly as long as whole bean coffee is going to. So that's a component you need to keep in mind. Additionally, once you have ground it on one setting, you can't go anywhere. You are stuck at that grind size for the entirety of that bag that you've purchased. This ultimately means you have a lot less control over your espresso, but there are still some variables you can play around with, namely your dose in and also the contact time that you're pulling your espresso in. So let's move over to the machine. Let's talk a little bit more about those things. Welcome to the espresso bar. This is very exciting that we have finally made it over here. Now, we have talked about bar basics to keep, and you can see many of those kind of behind me now in their proper place on my bar. We have talked about some basic cleaning practices, and we have also talked about how to choose a coffee that you're going to use on your espresso bar. I mentioned earlier the word variable when we were talking about the option of pre-grinding your coffee at a roastery or at a cafe. There are a whole lot of variables when it comes to dialing in your espresso. And dialing in, if you're not familiar with that term, is basically just a phrase that is meant to represent the recipe for your espresso. Your dial for your espresso is the the recipe, and dialing in basically means fine-tuning or perfecting your recipe to make really good and tasty espresso. Of course, because coffee is essentially a science, there are a lot of different components that go into dialing in your coffee. You could do an entire massive, humongous, like 24-hour deep dive on the science of dialing in coffee. There is a ton of data and information out there, and there's also a lot of really helpful videos out there about it. This is not gonna be necessarily one of those. I just wanna go across like the overview, the most important variables I think you should be thinking about at the very beginning of your dialing in journey. If you want to dive down that rabbit hole, you are more than welcome to, but this is just gonna be like a little nudge in that direction. So we already talked about the first variable a little bit earlier, which is your grind size. This is a grinder, this is a grinder, there's a grinder over there, there's a grinder over there. There are a whole lot of grinders out there. You might have one at home if you also have an espresso machine. Your grinder, at its most core level, does two things. It makes the coffee finer or it makes the coffee coarser. That is called your grind size, and that is a very important variable in your espresso. Now, another important variable that you have the option to play around with very easily is called your dose in, or the dry weight of your coffee. This is very literally the dry coffee that you are going to be grinding and then compacting into this portafilter right here. So, and this is where those scales come in. I have a scale right here, and so whenever I pull espresso, I always weigh out the amount of beans I'm going to be using beforehand. This is important both in kind of figuring out what your recipe should be and also in making your recipe very replicable. You'll notice a thread here across like all coffee things is that we want coffee to be replicable. The next thing, and very similarly to that, is going to be your dose out, or your final just beverage. Similarly to how we weigh the dose in or the dry weight of our coffee, we're going to weigh out the, for lack of a better term, the wet weight of our coffee as well. So when I pull my espresso, I have a little scale that sits right here. I have my cup on top, and I'm actually weighing out how much liquid is falling into the cup that I'm going to be drinking my espresso out of. Espresso is a big game of ratios and proportions, and so being able to knowledgeably know what those proportions are that you're preparing, whether it's a 1:2 or 1:3, is really important as you get into the minutia of dialing in. Now, the last variable that you kind of have to think about here at the beginning of dialing in is going to be the time that your espresso takes to pull. How long since we pressed the button to start the espresso, and how long since we stopped it? How long has that water been in contact and pushing through this puck of espresso? That's another variable that you have the option to play with and should at the very least pay attention to when dialing in your coffee. I'm not here to tell you exactly what the right way or the wrong way is to dial in coffee, because there's a whole bunch of right ways, there's a whole bunch of wrong ways, and there is everything in between. You'll kind of have to find what fits best to you, but at the very least, let me show you how I start with a coffee when I'm doing it for the first time. So let's say I got a new bag of coffee in, here's where I might start. The first thing I like to pay attention to is the roast profile. So is it a light roast? Is it dark roast? Is it a medium roast? Because that will influence kind of where I want to start out. I usually have in mind some parameters that I like to begin with. Today we're working with a light roast, so we'll work within my light roast parameters. We always have to start somewhere with espresso. You can kind of just chuck beans in and grind it and see what comes out. And if that's how you want to start out, great. How I like to start out is I like to start with I like to aim for a recipe. I suppose I will try to taste it at that recipe, and then I will make adjustments based on that, because coffees do not taste all great at the exact same recipe. You will have really funky parameters that number-wise might seem wrong, but work really well with specific coffees. It's all just kind of a game, and there's no right or wrong answer. Now, with a pretty standard light roast, this is a blend of coffees. It's pretty middle of the road and pretty standard as far as coffees go. I like to start with 19.5 grams in. That's just where I like to start. I have my scale. I have a little cup for weighing out my coffee. Pop that on there. And that's too much. I'm gonna pull some back out. That is 19.5 grams of coffee inside here. And my grinder is currently somewhere. It's where I was using it in the past couple of days. We're not gonna change the grind size. We're not gonna try to preemptively decide anything or make any adjustments. We're just gonna go with where it is and we see what comes out. For this first shot with dialing in, you want to keep it as simple as possible. Again, this coffee is just a mystery right now. We don't know anything about it. We don't know where it wants to sit or how it's going to pull, but we can't find that out unless we just try something. So we're just going to go with where everything was. We'll see what comes out. And then we wait. This is the waiting portion of the workflow. because we're keeping it simple today, we're not gonna be using any sort of like distribution tools. We're just gonna be using a tamp, which is probably the thing you already have on hand. Now, because of that, we're gonna have to do a little bit of distribution manually or with our hands. After your coffee comes out, you probably have a little mountain of coffee somewhere in the portafilter. What you're gonna do is I'm just gonna use my finger. I'm not doing any pressure, but I'm just kind of like distributing that little mountain of coffee more evenly across the portafilter. I might do a little bit tapping with my hands just to again kind of evenly distribute everything. I'll make sure the edges and the fork of my portafilter is clean. Sometimes, just for funsies, I'll give it a firm tap or two on the countertop. This is again all to make sure that the coffee is as evenly distributed throughout this basket as possible. That's very important for a nice even extraction. Then, once I'm pretty happy with it, again, I'm using my tamp mat and making sure my portafilter is nice and perpendicular with the floor, meaning that the basket here is nice and flat. Grab my tamp, press it evenly down in the center, then I press with more weight. Release, up, wipe my hand across the top to make sure there aren't any grounds. There you go. That is a pretty decent looking puck. Now a quick note about tamping. Something that you might hear a lot. You don't hear it as much nowadays, but something that is in a lot of articles online is the phrase that you should be tamping your espresso with 30 pounds of pressure. And that doesn't really mean anything to anyone. It is very difficult to be able to measure the exact weight of the pressure you are tamping with. It is very possible to do, but it's difficult and you probably don't want to have to go through the trouble of setting that sort of experiment up. A better way to think about it, you want to tamp until you feel resistance, where that bed of coffee has become compact and it kind of pushes back at you a little bit. Now that amount of weight and that amount of like pressure will be kind of different for everyone. The point is not that your tamp pressure is the same as everyone else's in the world. The point is that you can replicate your own tamping style again and again and again. Again, this is all about being replicable and about fitting to you. I can tell you for certain that I'm able to tamp with the same amount of pressure every single time. But I can tell you also for sure that the way that I tamp and the way that my coworkers at the cafe I work at, the way they tamp is different. And that is totally fine because it all is a matter of knowing how you tamp and knowing that when you step onto bar after someone, you might have to redial a little bit to fit to your tamping style. That is a whole aside right there. Anyways, let's start pulling some espresso. Also, don't forget to get a cup of some sort. I cannot tell you how many times I have forgotten to get a cup out. Okay, I have now torn the scale here. So this is at 0 with the cup on it, meaning that when this starts pulling, we're gonna keep an eye on this number down here. I am aiming for hopefully about 40 grams out, and I want this to be pulled in about 25 to 27 seconds. That's my usual like starting recipe. We will taste it and then we'll make adjustments from there. Let's see what we have. Already I can tell that this coffee is pulling a little bit slow. Okay, so that was about 31 seconds, which is more seconds than I was hoping for. We also didn't make it to the full 40 grams. We made it to about 35 grams in total, but all is not lost. We're gonna taste where it's at right now, and then we'll decide what adjustments, if any, that we need to make. I always like to have a little spoon. I like to stir my espresso. It's nice. It tastes like it ran a couple seconds long. It is not an awesome shot of espresso. It's also not too bad, surprisingly. When you look at the numbers of your espresso, when you look at the kind of the recipe and the science behind it, it can be very easy to just lean into those and rely solely on them. Something I would encourage you though is to also rely on your own opinions and your own palate and how you perceive the taste of espresso. There are some coffees out there that work really, really well with some parameters that on paper look super, super weird, and that's okay. Not all coffees act the same, and in fact, most act very, very differently from another. And that's the really fun part about kind of figuring out how to dial in coffees, is that sometimes you'll end up with a recipe that seems really, really strange, but in the cup, it tastes delicious. This, unfortunately, doesn't taste delicious. It needs a little bit of work, but that's where you start messing with those variables. The last note I want to make before we kind of wrap up today, and especially about dialing in, is not to mess with too many variables at the same time. Meaning, we have a coffee that ran a bit too long. It didn't pull out to the right amount. And so if I wanted to be very, very dramatic and just go all in, I could just coarsen up that grind and drop the dose. And would it pull faster? Probably, but we've changed so many things all at once that it's gonna be really difficult to know what changed things in the right way and what changed them in the wrong way. When starting out learning how to dial in coffee, I usually recommend that people just focus on one parameter at a time. So instead of changing multiple things, you pick one and you just adjust that until you find what you like. I usually don't mess too much with grind size, especially especially at home. There's a little bit more flexibility in a cafe, but at home, I don't like messing with grind size too much, as it sometimes can lead also to excess coffee waste. What I like to mess around with a little bit more, at least at the beginning, is that dose in. So instead of dosing in, what do we do? 19.5 grams on this next shot. I'm gonna keep my grind size the same, but I'm gonna dose in 19 grams even. We'll just take it down half a gram and see what changes. That is a lot more controlled way and also more like mentally manageable way to approach dialing in coffee in the beginning. Once you get a lot of experience, if you really want to start messing with multiple variables at once, have at it, but I don't recommend jumping into that straight away. Anyways, this was the video. At least for now. We have talked about bar basics, we have talked about basic cleaning procedure, we have also talked about how to choose a coffee, and a bit about how to dial it in the beginning. All of the things that we touched on today, there are many people who have gone very in depth about them. So as kind of an extension to the rabbit hole, if you feel so pushed in that direction, I'm gonna be linking a lot of very helpful videos from other creators down below that I highly recommend you check out. Even if you might not want to do those things now, if you're interested in coffee, they're fun, informational pieces that eventually you might have need for. Anyways, I'm gonna go drink this. Frankly, it's an okay shot. I need some caffeine if you can't tell. And so we're not gonna waste this today. In the meantime, feel free to leave any comments or questions or things that I can clarify down below. I will do my best to be down there at least for a while after this is posted. Again, I am Morgan Drinks Coffee pretty much everywhere that I'm active, including here on YouTube. I know a lot of you noticed this. YouTube has done this new thing where they have like handles versus like usernames now. And so apparently, I don't remember changing this, but apparently my like channel shows up now, says Morgan Eckroth, which is just my name, but my handle is still Morgan Drinks Coffee. So it's new. I don't know if I'll keep it. I don't know if I'll like it. We'll see how it goes. But anyways, I'm definitely still Morgan Drinks Coffee on TikTok and Instagram, where you can find me pretty much every day nowadays. So until next time, I hope you all had a great time. And I hope you're also having a good day right now. I'll see you later. Bye everyone.